Okay, so we are live. Get a drink of water. And maybe adjust this lighting just a little bit. It's a little bit bright. Oh, wow. How's that? Better? I gotta work on the lighting. Okay, well, that's good enough for now. But we have a great, very interesting show tonight. We're going to be talking about a recent stream that Curt Jaimungal had with Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky actually is a professor at the University of Arizona. I believe he still is, at least. I'm from Tucson, which is where the University of Arizona is. He was not a professor when I lived there, but still pretty cool. I didn't go there, but I almost did. His discussion was on right here. Consciousness, reality.
Just a note, if you haven't seen the April Fool's video, The Ranking of the Toes, then click on the link in the description, as I placed quite a significant amount of effort into it, and people seem to enjoy it, which is always a delightful match.
By the way, I did watch that ranking of the toes that Curt is talking about. It's very funny. Let me just adjust my settings here because I was listening to this at 1.5 speed. So this is not my day job yet. But, so, let me just check the volume here. Seems good. Okay. So, this conversation was on consciousness, reality, mind-body connection, and mathematical realism. It's on meaning and numbers and all kinds of things. So we're going to get into it. But a lot of it is extremely relevant to my work with Sentient Singularity Theory. And I think that Sentient Singularity Theory answers a lot of, I guess you could say, questions, but statements about questions that Noam Chomsky makes. I don't know. My introduction to Noam Chomsky was through politics, and I usually tended at the time, many years ago at least, to disagree with him. I haven't looked at his politics since then. I probably do disagree with him on who to vote for at least, but he does seem to really understand a lot of very important concepts when it comes to science and, obviously linguistics, meaning, consciousness, things like that. So I have a series of clips here that we're going to go through, but I just wanted to do some housekeeping. I'll repeat this at the end for those who aren't here now, but we will have a call, even if it's short, on Thursday in the Discord, an open call. Those have been great. They've been going, pretty late. They happen at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and they at least have been going to midnight. I've been trying to call them at midnight because they went quite a bit later than that a number of times, and it's just a lot. But it's good because it saves things and questions for the next week. It's a really good group of people in there who are genuinely curious and, honest about intellectual pursuits. And I highly recommend that call to anybody who thinks that they're that type of person. But you have to ask me for the link on Instagram. It could be my personal Instagram or my Theory of Every0ne Instagram, but you have to ask me for the link because I don't just leave it somewhere. I've noticed that just tends to invite in the type of person that is not what that group is for. So, sometimes when you make things require some effort, the more dedicated type of person ends up, fulfilling and completing that. So it's not that hard, though, to ask me for a link. I'm trying to think. Next week we will be off because it is Passover and it is Easter on Sunday. But I'm going to be away on vacation for that entire time to see my family for the holidays. So I will not be back until the week after. There will be no call next week on Discord. There will be no stream next week on here. But we'll be back full force the week after. The paper that I've been working on has been making progress, and I'm not publicly announcing when it will be due, but soon. But I kept going past my deadlines that I was announcing publicly, and I'm not going to do that anymore. So I will, once it's done, I will let everybody know, and then there will be not a live stream, a video walking through the paper, but it will be fairly soon. Trying to think of anything else. I don't think so, but I have had a couple people ask me whether or not it's good to ask questions in the chat or in the comments down below or in the Discord. And I would say that if you want me to talk about it live while I'm in a live stream, ask it in the chat. But otherwise, you can comment it below as a comment. And if you really want to get into it, you can ask it about it in the Discord. But you can even say in the comments, we should talk about this in the Discord, because I'm not going to get super detailed in the comments sections of these videos. It would be endless discussion, and I'm not the fastest typer. So, but with that, let's get into the stream. So, this is the first clip. I'm going to try and keep this to 2 hours. This was definitely my favorite interview I've ever seen of Noam Chomsky, just because of the topics.
Thank you and enjoy. So number one, Putnam in 1979 argued that the indispensability of mathematics to empirical science gives us a good reason to believe in the existence of mathematical entities. According to this line of argumentation, reference to or quantification over mathematical entities such as sets, numbers, functions, and such is indispensable to our best scientific theories, and so we ought to be committed to the existence of these mathematical entities. To do so would be called intellectual dishonesty, at least in Putnam's mind in 1979. Moreover, these mathematical entities are seen to be on the same epistemic par with other theoretical entities of science, since belief in the existence of the former is justified by the same evidence that confirms the theory as a whole. This argument is known as the Quine-Putnam indispensability argument for mathematical realism. So what is your opinion on this, sir?
Well, in the first place, I think it's a bit unfair to accuse Quine, Goodman, others of intellectual dishonesty because they worked on what they called constructive nominalism, which was an effort to reconstruct our understanding on the basis with denial of the existence of sets. I don't think that was intellectually dishonest. I think it was quite a reasonable effort on the part of Quine and Goodman. The Quine abandoned it later. Goodman came to it. Secondly, there's considerable difference between numbers, sets, and, let's say, atoms or chairs. I'm sure Putnam would agree. So, as he knew better than I do, there's no clear notion of set. There's a reasonably clear notion of number, putting aside non-standard theories. So we can assume number to be understood. Set is a famous statement by the mathematician Kronecker that God gave us the natural numbers and everything else is a human creation. Of course, he didn't mean it literally. He meant natural numbers are just somehow there. We can try to understand them, but they have their properties and so on. Sets are concepts that we develop. First of all, there isn't any such thing as a set, just a set of something. then if we talk about what's the right form of set theory, there are different approaches. So you can have an axiomatic set theory like Zermelo, Frankl. You can have constructivist set theories, which just develop as people's intuition develops. There are different forms of set theory. Then quite beyond that, take the difference between numbers and what is postulated in scientific theories, like atoms, or at one time in history, phlogiston or caloric. They're different. I mean, when, say, a star can go out of existence, a 3 can't go out of existence.
Okay. Lots to discuss here. So, I'm going to disagree with something specific, is that, and that is that atoms are different than numbers. Okay? So, I do think that numbers are fundamentally real, but numbers, there is the abstract, and there is the material. We're going to get into that in a bit later because they discuss it. But when the universe is creating, when God is creating, because according to sentient singularity theory, at least, there's nothing but sentient singularities or sentient beings, and that as multiplicity of sentient beings is created, so too is all the perspectives of those multiplicity of sentient beings. And there are no truly differentiated quantities in the universe or in existence until there is differentiated sentiences, okay? Sentient beings, sentient singularities, not just one. So that means that numbers are not in existence outside of the existence of quantities of sentient beings. So let's say that God is one sentience, his existence itself, and then he divides his energy by 3, and now you have, you could say, 3 or 4 sentiences, okay? Because, or you could say he has creation. God has creation. This is a better example. And there's the creator, and then there's the creation, the created sentience within, the created sentience without, and the created sentience within. That creator sentience, that's 2 sentiences. At that moment is when 2 exists kind of materially. Conceptually, it already exists, but not even, but there's still a limit to the amount of number that conceptually exist even even after that creation. Okay, so this is complicated, but I think that this is going to be kind of relevant to Stephen Wolfram's like computational irreducibility type idea. And I just finished watching this interview with Noam Chomsky right before this, so I haven't had enough time to really think about how to exactly articulate it, but let's see if we can work this out. And it is that nothing exists in existence, okay, true existence, until it is truly like calculated. If you think about the universe or existence as a computer, which is a sentient computer, but it's a computer, until it computes a new sentience, like there is a limit. The limits to the numbers that can even be contemplated by this sentient computer are limited by the amount of creation of information that has already happened and been done by this sentient computer that is existence or the universe. That's a perfect way to describe it. Hopefully people were able to follow that. So the amount of information is limited until it is literally created. Okay? And so what information fundamentally is constrained by is numbers of sentient beings. And because each sentient being, depending on its position, has specific constraints and degrees of freedom that it is able to perceive. And those perceptions are each like a little like a bit of information, kind of. And they are created by the perceptions of the constraints and degrees of freedom of sentient beings. So they're limited by the number of sentient beings that exist, okay? And by the relationships between them and things like that. But so there, in my work, as information is changed, there's a specific number of perspectives and a specific number of actions that are generated, or specific number of, I guess you could say, perspectives and actions generated. And each perspective and action is a bit of information unto itself, kind of. So I disagree with the idea that 3 exists if everything else disappears. If all creation disappeared, I don't think that the number 3 would exist. It does exist at the moment of creation, but it doesn't exist outside of creation. It exists in the moment of creation. So my work gets into this, my paper will get into this, it shows why this is the case, and it has models and things like that. But I think that the idea that numbers are just this abstract kind of ideas, or even idea or set of ideas, or ideas, plural, is wrong. I think that they are tied to what would be fundamental reality, which is, a combination of mind and matter, or the material and the ideal, which are 2 sides of one coin, which is sentience. So you have a sentient, if you want to say, like, I don't know, this coin right here, penny. This penny represents sentience. There's 2 sides to sentience: matter, which is heads, and mind. Or mind, which is heads, I guess you could say, and matter, which is tails. But there are 2 sides of one coin. That coin is sentience. It's difficult, because sentience is a dynamic. A sentient being is a dynamic being. It's not just one thing, and there's multiple perspectives of it. I have this this structure above me, and people sometimes ask me what this is, and I don't usually show it. Probably not enough, but if you've seen my cosmological verse model, it looks a lot like this. Okay, you can see it right here. Okay, and this is an evolving structure that's changing, and these are waves, and there's an animated version on my YouTube channel that you can check out. That's very good. But if I asked you, like, is this a wave? Or do you see the wave? Okay, do you see the wave? Yes, you see the wave. Do you see the double helix in the center? Right there. Okay. Yes. Do you see the square? Yes. Do you see the squares plural? Yes. So it's sentience, square. Sentience says, or sentient beings, multiplicity of sentient beings, squares, moving in a manner that causes information coherence throughout via a double helical structure, and that maneuvers or moves in a wave form, because the multiplicity is moving in wave form. That's what a wave is in the ocean too. It's it's lots of little particles of water molecules that are moving in a wave. So there is multiple perspectives to everything, and the number of perspectives that each sentient being can have is what generates numbers. That's like the number of perspectives that a sentient being can have. So maybe you could say that 3 exists outside of creation, but it exists as an idea out in the form of an idea outside of creation, in the form of mind, but it not yet in the form of matter. It would exist in the form of matter once creation happens, and that's because God has to put 1/3 of his energy into creation because of math. Basically, if you have like a sphere and then you have to take that sphere and you go, oh my gosh, this is just easier to show with a model. So I think it is actually already here. So yeah, this is a model of creation. And this sum is 1 here. There's 4 perspectives, but the sum is 1. So there's 1 sentient being, 4 perspectives of that sentient being. Oneness, inside, separate, outside. And it starts dividing its energy by first 1. That doesn't work because put all of your energy into creation, then you no longer exist. And you have to sustain your creation. It has to exist within you if you are fundamental existence. 2, your creation, if you divide yourself by 2, your creation is now the same size, quote unquote, of your, or same energy level as the creator, which means it takes the same amount of energy to exist, for the creator to exist, as it would take to run the creation, and they're the same size, so you can't fit them inside of each other. It's like you can't fit like a version of myself that physically that would be the same size as myself inside myself. That doesn't work. But you divide by 3, and all of a sudden you get the ability to physically fit a structure inside of the creator structure, a created structure inside of the creator structure, because 1/3 is smaller than 2/3. So 2/3 is left over, 1/3 is what goes into creation, and 2/3 can run creation and creator and contain creation within the creator. So all of a sudden, this returns as true. It's an equation, and once that happens, so if I put 0 here, it's just nothing. But if I put 1, all of a sudden you get all these numbers. And I think that numbers are not generated the way that we normally think that they are, where it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these normal numbers. And to highlight what I mean by this is, let's say you have here you have mental, or I guess idea. I guess you could say ideas, creations. So you have an idea, right? Say you want to build a bookcase. You perceive the bookcase in your mind, and then you also can create that bookcase. So it's no longer just an idea, it's a creation. And what this is it's the creation, when it's an idea, of numbers in an abstract sense, but then there's also the creation of numbers in a material sense, or like a concretized sense. And in creation, it's different. So you go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Okay. You can just Let's go there. With creations, it's different. So this is like the Fibonacci sequence right here. This is the Fibonacci sequence. It's the generation of like a set. Okay? Almost. And this is just, it's where all of a sudden an idea becomes created, or this is the space in which an idea can become created or can be created. This is the space in which it can exist in your mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And each time one of these numbers is created, it's going to be in relationship with these. And this is a very difficult problem that I've been working on for quite some time. And like, I really work on it. For instance, like, these are all spin sequences, and information is generated as you spin around yourself. So just as an example, watch this. Don't pay attention to what the numbers are, but if I scroll here, you can see that it's like a spiral, okay, in the green. This is just a sequence of numbers that's being generated via an equation that is building off of other equations and stuff like that. So I call this the growth sequence. I'm still studying it. I don't know exactly like how to explain it yet, but there's a number of, there's the order numbers, and then there's the Fibonacci numbers, and then there's the Lucas numbers, and they're all interacting in order to create. But there is a mental part of this, and there's a physical part of this. And there's this. Lost my tab here. I think it was over here. Great. Okay, well, I hope you guys kind of understand what I'm saying, at least as best as I can explain it, because the reality is I can't fully articulate the interaction, and I can't fully explain the interaction between the numbers sequences that it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. I can tell you that there is an interaction between basically the Fibonacci sequence and numbers that are counted up by 1 each time. What I think it is that I think it's actually backwards in a way. So what I mean by that is, if you're looking at like this, what I think that these are generated first, and these are generated second. So basically, from here, then you generate this. And then from here, you would generate this. From here, you would generate this. And then 5 would be this. And then 6 would be this. I have no idea how to model this. It's like, it would require like 4-dimensional modeling. It's not possible that it's to easily model it in 2 dimensions, because you have to show that each one's kind of building here is building off of these. But I think that these are what comes primary, not these. Okay? And it's also it's complicated because the count of each cell also could be generating of this. So you can say that the count here of 4 is generative of this 4. So, but regardless, I think that this comes first, or that comes primary, but it's not even this. It's the count of this comes primary, then probably the sum of what's included, or the calculation that's included inside, and then this. It's really tough. By the way, hit the like button, ask any questions in the chat that you may have, and I'll get to them. But numbers do, I think, exist in a much more concrete way than we think. And I'm not exactly sure of how yet, but I can tell you where they're coming from. I can't tell you the interaction between the counting sequence, I guess you could normal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., and how that interacts with the Fibonacci sequence, and how those interact with the count of the numbers in each sequence. But I'm telling you, they absolutely do. And they are generative of each other to some degree, and it might be just that they are generative of each other. That's kind of what I guess my theory might suggest, to be honest. But if you're going to ask which order do they go in, I think that they go the Fibonacci sequence first, over the counting sequence. But I'm not sure about that. That might be wrong. It might be the opposite. So this is, that's my, if you hear any groaning, by the way, that's my dog just groaning. But I don't know the interaction of this yet. We will touch more on this as the year goes on, and I think that there's a lot more work that we could get done on it. It will, the understanding that will unlock aspects of science that I can't even predict right now. That I know. Like, the sky's the limit with that. Warp, blockchain related technologies. I don't even know exactly which would be the ones to focus on with that, but things that would seem like magic today. And it comes from understanding numbers. Very complicated. Okay, next clip. This next clip is on what Curt is calling contrast words. So, like, in order to know what a dog is, you need to know what's not a dog. And this is very relevant to statements I've made about how you can't understand a theory of everything, really, until you propose your own.
Informal English,
or you can't criticize.
It gives it a different meaning, even though the literal meaning is.
You have to have your disagreement be emergent from your belief. So, or your disbelief has to be emergent from your belief. And this, so you could say, if I said, do you believe in unicorns? And you're like, no, I don't believe in unicorns. There has to be a belief that you have that causes that to emerge. Otherwise, your disbelief would be like illogical. But we're going to listen to them discuss this. But it's relevant to discussions regarding the theory of everything, because there is no nothing objectively. In objectivity or outside relativity, there is no nothing. So there's no zero as an empty set. There is just existence, not non-existent. There is no such thing as non-existence. That's a subjectively observed perspective within relativity, and that's it.
And nothing very much to say about it except describing it. There's no theory of it. We can describe it in various ways. someone with more literary talent than I have could give a better description. But that's about where we are.
Number 4. So are all words contrast words, which is just a word that I'm giving it, which means to understand the concept of dog, one needs to know what is not a dog. Some people say this, but I imagine they're not linguists, they're just imprecisely saying this. So if this is the case, then to me, then the word everything / the universe would have to imply that one has a conception of what's not included in everything. But then you get some paradox there, because if you have an understanding of what's not included in the word everything, you can include that in the word everything.
Okay, so real quick, we'll go briefly over this, at least, but it's the opposite. It's at least in majority of circumstances, it's that you cannot have an understanding of what is not a dog without understanding what is a dog. It's not that you need to have an understanding of that which is not a dog in order to understand that which is a dog. You actually don't need to have a connection there, because you'll basically break down logic if you say that is not a dog, and I know that these things are not dogs. And then if I said, is a light bulb a dog? And you're like, no. And if I'm like, is a car a dog? And you're like, no. I'm like, is a skunk a dog? You're like, no. So is a wolf a dog? No. Okay. Then what is a dog? If you only knew those things were not dogs, okay, let's assume that somebody told you they weren't dogs and you knew they weren't dogs and you could trust that information. You knew a light bulb wasn't a dog and a skunk wasn't a dog and a wolf wasn't a dog and a car wasn't a dog. It doesn't actually tell you what a dog is. But where logic does work is if you knew what a dog is, and then I showed you something that was a car, and I'm like, is this a dog? Is a car a dog? And you could be like, no, it's not a dog, because a dog is this. So it's the opposite of what Curt is suggesting. It's in most circumstances. Now, once you start talking about existence, it gets more difficult and simple at the same time, because it's just like, it's so simple that it's like, it's not normal for our minds when you're talking about existence. But it's when you're talking about contrast words should not, we shouldn't even, I don't like the term contrast words, because it implies that kind of putting the cart before the horse. You have to know what something isn't before you know what something is. And I disagree with that. I think a true understanding always comes from knowing what something is, and therefore emergently knowing what it isn't, because you intrinsically know what it is, versus intrinsically knowing what it isn't and emergently knowing what it is. That doesn't work, except in like multiple choice questions. You could be like, I know it's not, the answer to this question is not A, and it's not B, and it's not C, so therefore it must be D. You can do that in a multiple choice question, but when it is a question that is of definitions, where there isn't a limited number of options as the answers, and those answers are in those multiple choice situations, are one of them has to be right. Outside of that situation where one of those answers has to be right, and it has to be one of those answers. Maya, shh, it's okay. Relax. Sorry. Then this idea of like contrast words, knowing what something is not, allowing you to know what something is not how it works. It has to be you know what something is, and therefore you know when something is not that. But you cannot know what something is not, or know what something is from knowing what it's not, but you can know what something is not from knowing what it is. This is an idea that I've had a lot, that I've discussed a lot when it comes to theories of everything, when it, like Tim Nguyen criticizing geometric unity. And I don't think that you can say, if I said matter is mind, or matter and mind are two sides of one, being, And you were like, no, it's not. And I'm like, okay, then what is matter? And you're like, I don't know, but it's not that. That is not a logical argument. So it only works in multiple choice questions where you can derive what something is from knowing what it's not. In the world outside of multiple choice tests, you must know what something is in order to derive that which it is not. But you cannot do it the opposite. So it's very important, and it is an aspect of logic that must be understood by anybody who is really going to honestly pursue this, really anything, but especially if you're going to pursue being critical or criticizing another idea or theory or whatever, or you're trying to define or you're criticizing a definition, something like that. Any kind of being critical your criticality has to be emergent, not intrinsic. And it's a great question to discuss, or a great topic to discuss. So I'm glad that it was brought up in this. Interesting. I'm going to try and say less, but to go back to the previous question, when Curt and Noam Chomsky were discussing mathematical entities, this is what comes up when I search mathematical entities. Thus, according to this conception of realism, mathematical entities such as functions, numbers, and sets have mind and language independent existence, or, as it also is commonly expressed, we discover rather than invent mathematical theories. I agree with that, which are taken to be a body of facts about relevant mathematics. Okay. Interesting. The main branch. There's 4 main branches of mathematics, apparently, according to this. I expected that, but interesting. Anyways, in my paper, I discussed this in the last section that I have almost finished working on. It is about what is that which objectively exists versus subjectively exists. So what exists, I don't want to say what exists outside of specific perceptions. And I even wrote about it. Maybe I can read a tiny bit here, but I said the definition, and this is a working definition, of objective observation is the perception of that which exists independently of observations or definitions by an outside or separate observer. So it has to exist outside of it being observed by a separate being. The lines between the structure that objectively exists and the structures whose existence is defined by the subjective perceptions of separate observers are the lines that frame the fundamental components of any true TOE, or theory of everything. So what this is saying is you're trying to understand what is the fundamental building block structure of reality. I'm proposing that it is sentience, and my theory then goes on to state the answer to, it says what can be understood to still exist as distinct and defined structures beyond specific definitions within the subjective experiences of separate observers. The answer is observers themselves. The totality of existence can be broken down into 2 different types of existence. 1, inanimate things that are perceived and defined by sentient beings, and 2, sentient beings that are perceiving and defining of those inanimate beings. So things and beings are what sentient singularity breaks down the world into. And and this is what I'm talking about, where with the Fibonacci sequence and the numbers of just counting. Things would be like numbers counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The Fibonacci sequence numbers would be those that count. Okay, so 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Those numbers. What's interesting is that they are literally counting. Okay, or containing a certain number of numbers, of quantity, a certain quantity within them. Okay, so if you say 1 and 1, and then 2 is containing of the 2 before. 3 would be containing of those 2 before, so 2 and 1, and so on. And then 5 is containing of 3 and 2, and this is how the Fibonacci sequence is counting. And it's these numbers, in the way that they, in a counting sequence where you just go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, when you think about the action that has to be done in order to generate the next number, you just add 1 every time. There isn't a it's not unique. Okay, the structure, I mean, it is, but it's not. The action is not unique. The action is the same. Whereas with the Fibonacci sequence, you add the 2 previous together every time, which those 2 previous quantities always change. Whereas with counting, one of them always remains the same, which is 1. So it's, you're at 3 and you're going to go to 4. You add 3 to 1. You just add 1 to 3. Then you're at 4 and you go to 5. You add 1 to 4. So you just add 1 every single time. The Fibonacci sequence isn't like that. The Fibonacci sequence requires you to add the 2 previous numbers together in order to get the next one. And there is an element of like self-awareness to this sequence that is much more intrinsic than the sequence of, just counting up by 1 every single time, because you don't need to know the previous number in order to know the next action in just counting, because no matter what the previous number, you just add 1. But in order to know the next action, you must know the previous numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. Yes, the action is you add the previous 2, and you don't need to know the previous numbers in order to know that that is what you do. But if you include the information within that is as intrinsically linked or intrinsically as part of the action itself. So it's not just the action isn't just adding the 2 previous, it's adding 2 and 3. Okay, so you can't really separate. You can't just say adding the 2 previous. You have to say what those numbers are in order to describe the totality of the action that's being done. So you have 1, and then you have 1, and then if you're going to describe the next step, you can't just say add the 2 previous. You have to say add 1 and 1. And then the next one, if you're going to get 3 as the 4th number in the Fibonacci sequence, you can't say just add the 2 previous. You have to say add 2 and 1. Okay? And so because of this, like, this is a Fibonacci sequence is generating like mathematical entities in a way. So you are a mathematical entity. There is a specific quantity that generated you, and the number of perspectives as well. So it's twofold. It's that superposition of numbers. There are numbers of created quantities or quanta of consciousness, and then there is a number of perceived bits of information. So, and that together has to there is entangled, and that can generate sentient beings. So mathematical entities, very real, and I don't think that material reality, like atoms, is separate from mathematical perception. Okay? If there was only, 3 sentient beings in existence ever, and I'm including atoms in that and stuff like that, because sentient singularity theory states that atoms are sentient beings, then there wouldn't be, 120 as a number that would be perceivable. I'm guessing a number, There is a number that would be perceivable to those 3 sentient entities, and it would be higher than 3. Might be like, I don't know, like 36. I have no idea. I need to think about it. But it would not be, it would have a limit to it. That's my point. That's very, very weird to think about. Like, that's not proposed by anyone that I've ever heard. It's like that there's a limit to numbers based on the number of atoms in the world, or, sentient beings in the world. Limits the amount of numbers that you can even conceive of in your mind as just purely ideas. Okay, next. Okay, this is just to highlight something that I talk about a lot when they're talking about definitions of, like, what is a house. Jordan Peterson talked about this too. He's like, what is a table? Is it a square thing with 4 legs, or is it a sitting down to eat place? And Jordan Peterson's right. It is fundamentally a sitting down to eat place.
Aristotle he gave as an example the word house. Said, what's a house? And his metaphysics, house is a combination of matter and form. The matter of a house is bricks, timbers, so on, things a physicist could find looking at a house. The form of the house is basically a mental construction. It's the design, what the architect have in mind, the intended use, and so on. Something could look like a house exactly, but be something totally different. Could be a library, could be a stable, could be an artistic object that you put on your shelf, could be all kinds of things, and look exactly like a house. In fact, and if you look further at the notion house, it's much more complex. So our concept of house has a designated exterior. It's an exterior. So if I paint the house brown, I'm painting the outside. Suppose it's a 1-room schoolhouse. If I paint the schoolhouse brown, it's on the outside. If I paint the room brown, it's on the inside. That's our way of conceiving the object. The object is the same. When it gets to
inside and outside, like my two of my 4 primary perspectives.
more complex than that. I should qualify here. Aristotle was talking metaphysics. What is a house? But if you look at his theory of signs, his semantic theory, he held on interpretation that we have internal signs which are universal. All people have them, abstract words. And the word is just as the properties of the thing referred to. So we can carry it over and say, for the word as well, it's has the properties of form and meaning, and goes way beyond if you look more closely. In the 17th century, there was a major cognitive revolution, and these ideas were reinterpreted in cognitive terms. And I think those are the terms in which we can look at them. But the conclusion is that house is not a sign that refers to anything. There's no entity in the mind external world that a physicist could look at and say, this is a house. Same is true of the first example that was used before Aristotle.
River?
Pre-Socratic, Heraclitus, who asked a pretty deep question. How can you cross the same river twice? He could have added, how can it be you both times?
Okay, lots of things about this. So there's 2 things that we're going to discuss from here. That's basically 2 clips. One, as I've said before, subjective things, okay, are perceived by beings and are defined fundamentally by goals, okay, by the relationship to a specific goal. A house can look like a traditional house with a slanted roof and a front door, and that's great. A house can also look like a hole in the ground. Okay, my snakes and lizards, their houses don't look like our houses. Their houses look like holes in the ground, for the most part. My geckos, their houses look like a hollow piece of bamboo. That's what their house looks like. Hollow log. So it's not about what it looks like. Just like as what he said, Noam Chomsky said, he said, house can look like a lot of things, and it can look, a lot of things can look like a house and not be a house. He's like, something can look exactly like a house, but be a library, for instance. That's true. And it's the goal of the structure that is being isolated by the mind, or within the mind of the observer. That isolated structure, the goal of that isolated structure, or our goal with that isolated structure, is that which defines it. A car can look like anything, but if it is, basically, if I get inside it and it's a personal device and it allows me to move around and travel at faster distances than normal, it's basically a car. But there's little defining aspects that we've created over time. It's not a horse and carriage, which is basically the predecessor to the car. It's not, we say flying cars, but flying cars will never exist. We're going to call them copters, or we already call them helicopters, planes, or we'll call them copters or something like that when they're personal, like quadcopter type devices. We'll never call them flying cars. But so because of that, you can kind of deduce that a car is defined by the fact that it has 4 wheels, or it has wheels. Okay, and this isn't the same as defining a car based on knowing what it's not. It's, like I said before, because we're calling things that we can't perceive in the future flying cars, just like in scriptures in like the Quran and things. They said in the future there'll be flying donkeys and that are powered by fire, and you'll crawl inside the belly of them and they'll soar above the clouds. It's like, he's talking about an airplane. And then in flying donkeys were transportation, and powered by fire meaning machines, and they're flying, so they're an airplane. Prior to the creation of airplanes, we were like, well, one day we're gonna all be like the Jetsons, we're gonna have flying cars. Even when we are like the Jetsons, we're not going to call them flying cars. So while it seems like you are defining a car as a car because you're looking at an airplane, you're like, that's not a car. That's not actually true. It's just we've changed the word that we're using to allow for us including specific attributes within the new definition, or that we couldn't previously be perceived. So, an airplane has aspects of that term that describe its being that couldn't necessarily be perceived before. A helicopter, same thing. But prior to that, we just called them flying cars. But you can't really define a car by knowing that it's not a plane. You know what a car is, and you know what an airplane is. And because you know what an airplane is and how it moves, and you know what a car is and how it moves, then you can say, okay, an airplane is not a car and a car is not an airplane. But it's because you know what each of those are. You couldn't define what a car is if you didn't know what it was, just because you knew it wasn't an airplane. So this doesn't violate what I said earlier. So I kind of lost. Okay, so the house thing. Yeah, I lost track of my thoughts for a second. But you define a house based on its goals, not by its structure. There are plenty of houses that do not look like what we think of as a house, and they are houses. A hole in the ground for a snake is a house. A hollow log for a gecko is a house. Doesn't look like our house, but it is a house. Why is it a house? Because it is its goals by that, the goals of that sentient being that are fulfilled by that structure, or that being has in its interaction with that structure, are the same goals as what we call houses fulfill. Okay? A school, like he said, a schoolhouse is basically looks like a house. It's not a house. Why? Because it has we have a different goal for school than we do a house. Even if they look exactly the same, they could be the same structure. You could take a house that has always been a house, it was built to be a house, and then you could start using it as a school alone and not a house. You could start using a school as a house, and it would no longer be a school, it would be a house. It would be a house that used to be a school, or a school that used to be a house, but it's not a school and a house unless you're using it for both the purposes of that a school is used for and that a house is used for. So all of these definitions for things are based on the goals of sentient beings' interactions with them. So sentient beings are the definers of things, of inanimate things, always. Always. There's no exceptions to this that I am aware of. And if you can point them out, write them in the chat, and I'll happily admit when I'm wrong, but I don't think so. So, and then the last statement that he made.
He could have added, how can it be you both times?
Okay. So then this next statement about a river, and if you cross a river twice, how can you even say that it's the same river? Noam Chomsky goes on to talk about crossing the Rito River in Tucson, and I think it's the Rito, and how there is no water on the surface. So, but we still call it the river, and it's just funny because I know exactly what he's talking about. But when we say, how can it be the same river that you cross twice? Or how can it be the same you that crosses the river twice, even? This is the same exact philosophical question or problem of, if you slowly replace every single bolt and screw and plank and piece of wood and every piece, bit by bit of a ship, when you finally replaced every single original piece of the original ship, is it still the same ship? And the answer is yes, it's still the same ship if you have replaced pieces according to a coherent, unbreakable chain of information. Unbroken chain of information. Okay, so you have not broken the chain of information coherence. When you have not broken the chain of information coherence, you can say it's the same entity. So if you said, screw this ship, and you weren't just replacing it piece by piece, but you just kept the masts, okay, and you scrapped everything else, and you just built everything else anew, the masts are the same masts as before, but it's not the same ship. Because you're not the goal, and it is, again, it's goal defined. If the goal wasn't, it's goal defined in this case, and it's also as a third person observer of subjective thing that's inanimate, but it's also goal defined in the first person in the objective, like as a being. It's like my goal is to continue to survive. It's to continue to maintain information coherence for myself. That defines what information coherence is to me. What defines information coherence to the ship that you're rebuilding is whether or not it is based on the goal of the sentient being that is interacting with it. So if my goal is to fix a ship that I currently have, and that's always my goal as I replace part by part by part by part by part, eventually you've got a totally new ship, but it's still the same ship. Or you've got all new parts, but it's still the same ship. But as soon as you're like, my goal is to say, screw this ship, let's just keep the masts and salvage what we can and build a new ship, you just destroyed information coherence of that thing as that original thing. And therefore, it's not the same thing, and is due to the changing of your goals. Okay. This is, like I said, I watched this right before this, so I'm working here. But if this is making sense, comment it in the chat. If it's not, tell me also, especially tell me in the chat if this is not making sense. But it's still goal defined. And if you're, let's say you cross a river, okay? And then you have to cross back the opposite direction of the river, of that same river. Why is it the same river? It's because your goal is to go backwards, okay? Or not even necessarily backwards, but to cross to the other side of a specific thing that you have in your mind maintained as a single coherent information system. That river is not sentient, but you as a sentient being in your relationship with that river are not changing it as from one river to the next. Whereas, let's say you go up the river even further and you get to basically, or let's say you're crossing a stream and then you continue to go up that stream and you reach a point where multiple streams converge into a single large river. Is that large river the same stream that you were paddling on before, or that you were crossing back and forth before? It depends. Depends on your goals, but the way in which we will define each stream versus river that it comes from and stream that it simultaneously forks from, and all of these things are definitions of their interrelated, I guess, of their relation to each other, let's say that, are still goal defined by us. So if you say stream A, we go upstream A, we get to river B, or river C, okay? And there's stream A, river C turns into stream A, stream B, and stream C, but you are at river A, or stream A, and you go up and you get to river C, and let's say that there's multiple rivers at some point that branch off from a lake above that. Differentiating between each of these structures is dependent upon our goal. And if I was telling you and you didn't have a map, okay, and there was no map in it, and you had to go reach a lake, and to reach that lake you had to go up the stream, and that stream would merge, would go into this larger stream structure, which is a river, in which multiple streams are emerging from, but you're in only one of them, and you go up, and then that river goes and merges into a lake, and from that lake there's multiple rivers, and from each river there's multiple streams. You don't care about those if your goal is just to go from the stream to the lake. You'd be like, Tyler, how do I get to this lake? I'd be like, go upstream and continue going against the current the entire way. I don't even need to tell you about the other streams and rivers because it's not part of your goal. But obviously a map, which is like a God's eye view, top-down perspective, is meant to show the multiplicity of paths so that everyone with different goals can use one map. But if you have one goal, you don't even need to know about the other streams and rivers. Just need to know, head against the current from where I am, and I will eventually reach the lake. So you don't need to differentiate between the river and the stream at all. Even though there's different branching points, it doesn't matter to you from a goal perspective. So it's all one structure. You just go against the stream or go against the current of the water. It's all one structure. Unless you're writing a map and you need to include, many paths for multiple different goals for multiple different people, or the same person at different times, things like that. I hope that made some sense. I realize it's complicated, but the point is, the main takeaway is our goals, either first person or third person, they are that which defines the coherence of a system, and the coherence of that system, the information coherence of that system as an unbroken chain of information, is that which constrains the oneness of that structure. So our goals define when we perceive differences between structures. So if I were to say, your goal is to buy kitchen furniture. It's all one, a table and a set of chairs. But if I'm like, we have a table, so we only need, and we also have chairs, but we just need, a replacement chair because somebody sat on it, on one of them and broke one. Then I could say your goal is to buy one chair, one kitchen chair or dining room chair, versus getting dining room furniture as one thing, one set, basically. The lines between how we define things and where differentiation between structures exists is based on goals. So if you have what is you, what defines you is your goal. So you don't have multiple goals that are conflicting within you as an actor. You are always defined by your central goal. That doesn't mean you don't have multiple goals in life. It just means, like, if I said, what are your goals? And you're like, my goals are to be single forever and to get married. It's like, what are you even saying? That makes no sense. But if I'm like, what are your goals? And you're like, my goal is to be single and then get married, or to get married, or to be single. Those three, the last three options that I stated, or goals that I stated, can be coherent actions, or goals, active goals. They're defining of your actions, or you as an actor. But if you're like, my goals are to be single and get married simultaneously, like there is no you acting in this kind of, it's like there is no you as an actor. You can't, it's just not possible. Don't try and overthink it, because the minute you try and think about it as in how that would be possible, is you've already overthought it. And don't do that. It's not going to be possible. So, next. Here's Noam Chomsky is talking about atoms being consciousnesses, essentially. I mean, he's not saying that they are, but he discusses the idea multiple points throughout this stream, and this leads us into the discussion of what is matter that he brings up, which is
Roughly
great.
a century ago, I pointed out, I think correctly, that what we are most confident about is our own experience. The rest of our intellectual efforts are attempts to make some sense of it. Science, for example, is an effort to see if you can make some sense of conscious experience. And he pointed out as well that we would like to explain consciousness in material terms, but the problem is we have no idea what material is. For example, we don't know whether all matter has consciousness. Arthur Eddington, his friend and colleague scientist, pointed out that we don't know that atoms don't have consciousness. We don't have a clear enough understanding of the basis of it. So as in recent work, Gell and Strawson, fine young philosophers, picked this up and pointed out, I think correctly, that it's not consciousness that has to be explained. That we understand very well. We can describe it in extensive detail. What we don't understand is matter. So when you talk about explaining consciousness, trying to account for it in material terms, the roadblock is we don't know what material terms are. In fact, that's true. You can pick up a journal of quantum mechanics, recent journal, somebody just sent me one, which is a symposium of leading quantum physicists trying to figure out what a particle is. They don't know. We know.
Okay. I love that he said this. He said, we kind of all know firsthand what consciousness is. So our experience. But it's the awareness of our experience, essentially, which or the awareness of our circumstances, which is our experience, kind of. But what he said, what we don't know is what is matter. And I actually agree with this. I think we all do know what consciousness is. It's self-reference. But, or sentience is self-reference, at least, self-awareness. Consciousness is kind of a loaded, ambiguous term at this point these days, but it's usually thought of as meaning like self-aware. We know what it means to be self-aware. I'm aware of myself. That's what it means. It's kind of like a self-referencing definition, almost. But what is matter is the question. And Sentient Singularity Theory proposes what matter is. It's your mind inside of a mind, and the thoughts, which is the context, okay, the contextual connections, or contextualizing connections of that entangle lower levels, or the assembly of sentient beings that make up the mind that is having the thoughts that are contextualizing of the entanglements between the multiplicity that make it up. Those thoughts are experienced by us as essentially as matter, as hard material reality that we can't overcome. So that means is like God is a mind that is, the universe, the universal mind, your mind inside that universal mind. And the thoughts of that universal mind are, and the connections in that mind, or the thought streams, the information chains in that mind, are experienced by us as hard reality, or hard matter. So there is no difference between mind and matter. It's just, or ideas and idealism and materialism. It's just materialism is the experience of the ideas of the mind that we, as lower minds, are within, essentially. And like I said, mind and matter are two sides of one coin of sentience, which is also like multiplicity and singularity. The self perceives multiple strings of information. Those multiple strings of information are tails, and they are multiplicity feeding to a head, which is mind. So in my paper, I discuss this a lot as well, and basically says that here, each sentient singularity is informed by multiple entangled perspectives, and because perspectives are axiomatically the viewpoints perceived by sentient beings, axiomatically means like kind of obviously, like by definition, the viewpoints perceived by sentient beings, it follows that a sentient singularity and the entangled perspectives that inform it are, or a sentient being, you can substitute that, are simultaneously generative of each other. That is the whole this thing going on. That, so this would be like ideas or things, beings, I think. It might be the opposite. It might be that this is things and this is beings. I'm still thinking about this. This is tough, but they're generative of each other. Okay? They have to be. So it's tough. But anyways, let's move on to the next thing. But that is matter in sentient singularity theory. And we don't know what it is. And people say, but we don't know what consciousness is. And the reason why is because as soon as you know what consciousness is, you will know what matter is. And as soon as you know what matter is, you'll know what consciousness is. They are entangled. You cannot perceive one at a time. As soon as you get it right, what consciousness is, or sentience, or mind, is the moment that you also get matter correct. The moment that you understand what it means to think, as Noam Chomsky said, we don't know what it means to think. Like Turing said that, I think. I could tell you what it means to think, but I could also tell you what matter is, and I could also tell you what mind is, and I could also tell you what, kind of the relationships between these. And I really do believe that. I realize that sounds like, I don't know. What is it? Just cocky. But if I'm right, then like it doesn't matter. But I've said this before. True humility is just honesty. If you think that you're right, you can't be like, well, I'm probably wrong. No, if you really think you're probably right, the humble thing to do is to be like, guys, I really think I'm probably right. But we don't know what real humility is because we've just been exposed to posturing humility, where you have Barack Obama, ex-president of the United States, will be like, I wasn't that successful in life. It's like, that's fake humility. I'm not saying he's the only one that does that. Politicians do it all the time. I'm just using him as an example. But where if he was like, I'm not that good of a catch for Michelle, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, that depends on your definition. But if you're thinking about it being a catch being defined as like, physically capable and decent enough looking and successful, this is the main part, successful career-wise, it's like there isn't really much more greater success than becoming the president of the United States. Objectively, if you're just thinking about career success. I think that using career success as the objective standard of to which we judge success is wrong, though. There's much more important things than your occupation. And it also implies wrongly that it is a competition, and it's not. There is no competition in like true achievement in sociological circumstances, I guess. You can think that from our perspective there is competition, but that's not true from God's perspective. God is not competing against, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It's just like they perceive each other as competing against each other in the context of the goal of winning the presidency. So it's goal defined, like I said. But if your goal is not to win the presidency, it's something else, then even then there is no those wouldn't be winning the presidency wouldn't be the definer of success if your goal is not fundamentally winning the presidency. So like I said again, it's goal defined. But humility, my point is just honesty. And I would say it's like humility, if it's anything different than just pure honesty, it would be like empathetic honesty or like kind honesty. Like being honest, but also honest about the context in which your statement is being received, kind of like that. Let's say you just, I don't know, claim to be right all the time, and let's say you were just kind of a dick about it, like no matter what, not just for any goals or anything, you're just a dick about it all the time, and you were just calling people idiots constantly. That is like not necessarily humble. But if you're like, guys, I'm right, they're wrong, but I understand why they're wrong, and it's because of this, and that's an honest answer as well. Like it's because they're trying to define, what it means to derive the theory of everything from subjective terminology that's been created within subjective fields. It's like that's like an instance of just being aware of like why things are happening, like the human aspect of it. That doesn't mean that you should ever not say the truth. You should always say the truth. Just do it kindly and acknowledging of, the circumstances of the sentient beings that are involved. Noam Chomsky goes on, though, to basically state, when he's asked by Curt, what's the mind-body problem? And most people will try and say, well, what is mind? And we don't know what it is. But then Noam Chomsky is saying, well, actually, we don't know what the body is, because we don't know what matter is. Matter is the body. So, and I agree with this. It takes third person and I would say this: the study of consciousness is the study of mind and body. Okay, it's in certain circumstances, or its assumption is from the first person, is understood from the first person. So to say consciousness exists, how do you know consciousness exists? We need to try and figure it out from a third person perspective. That is wrong. You know it exists from your first person experience. You'll never find third person evidence that is able to be trusted as much as your first person experience. But understanding the various aspects of it does involve third person perspective. And they discuss this, and I've said this before here because Michael Levin once said, exploring consciousness is a first person endeavor. I would say it's starts off, and I've said that he was right before, but I would say it starts from a first person perspective, because it's the assumption of the existence of that which you are studying is from a first person perspective, or first person understanding. But from there, then you have to think about, okay, what is a body? But you can actually do that from a first person perspective as well. But then when you go and you try and examine how mind interprets the world, then you have to go or look for examples of that. At least you have to start looking from a third person point of view. So if you say a mind takes information and creates a binary of that says, this is light, and this, if this is light, then this would be dark. And from there, then you also could say there's a periodicity to the directionality of this, and that there's a relationship between these two. So you could say there's black and white and gray is in between. So now you have this triality structure. So now you've got this binary structure of dark and light. You've got this trialic structure of white, black, and gray. And then you could say that, you could break this into like colors or something, colors versus no color. And all of a sudden you've got this binary triality structure, which is like 6. Seeing why the mind is breaking the information into these structures, and these are just off the cuff examples, they're not exactly correct, but you start from that's first person, understanding how does my mind think about light? Well, it's like information. If it's dark, then it means like it's like the absence of information. And the only information that you can get from darkness is that it is the absence of definable information, or a discretized, view of information. You can just get this monastic view, I guess you could say, like just oneness and darkness. But then light, is able to allow you to see in a room, and you could say there's a water bottle and there's a shelving unit or whatever. But understanding what your mind is doing has to be done firsthand. Seeing examples of it, like the primary and secondary colors, are an example of that binary triality structure, which I think is a Calabi-Yau manifold, or PEMDAS, parentheses and exponents, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. This is another example of this binary triality structure. Understanding what the mind is doing in order to break information down like that is a first-person endeavor. Seeing examples of it, third person. Being like, what are my senses doing? What is the difference between my sense of smell and my sense of taste, even though they're basically the same in a way? It's like my sense of smell allows me to detect, in a way, the taste, almost, of things that are not touching me. Sense of taste allows me to detect kind of like the odor of that which is touching my tongue. So this is allowing you to differentiate between the sensing of things that are touching you and the sensing of things that are not. And this is also can be done with, like, I guess you could say, seeing and feeling, like things touching you. It paints a picture. If I, try and draw like a number on your hand or something, that's actually really hard for you to guess, like, what's the number. You can kind of try and picture that though in your head. You can see it. You close your eyes and I drew like a 4. Like, okay, I see a form. But one of your sense of touch is for that which is connected to you or impacting you, and what is touching you. And then your sense of sight is to perceive that which is, separate from you. So what is one with you, what is separate from you. Same exact thing with touch, with taste and smell. And I would also say emotions and like sounds. So sounds, it's funny because smells are the most tied. That sense is most tied to memory. You walk into a room that smells like your old grandma's house or something, and it's like all of a sudden it takes you back 20 years. You're like, I remember going to my grandma's house and it smelled like this. But your hearing, okay, sense of hearing is the most tied to emotion of any of them. And that's why music is the most emotive form of art. There's no painting in the world that will make people feel a certain way, the same way that, to the same level of predictability and consistency as music. You put classical music on, it's going to make people, calm for the most part. But if you put a painting up that might make, some people calm, it doesn't really make other people calm because it really doesn't impact them. Same thing with sense. It just doesn't have the same impact on emotions. Emotions are the perception of that which is most fundamentally touching you or moving you, literally. And then sounds are the perception of that which is separate from you, but is capable of moving you, I guess. It's like those are opposing. For a while, I was wondering, it's like, okay, smell and taste are clearly two sides of one coin. And then I was like, well, hearing and sight cannot be. So, what is touch hearing, or is sight like the opposite of touch? And I'm not exactly sure. I've thought that it's hearing is the opposite of touch, because they're both like the perception of like more physically manifested impact. So, and then sight would be like not so physically manifested, because sound waves, you can feel them. You don't like feel what you see so much. Unless it's just super, super bright. But like you can always feel sound waves. Just feel boom, 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 like bass. You can just feel pain from seeing something too bright. But like pain is different than just feeling. You don't feel anything with sight, what you see, other than pain. So I go back and forth on it, but I think that makes some sense though too. It's probably sight. To see and to feel, I think, would be actually the two sides of one coin that are like the most fundamental, not hearing and then feeling like emotions. But I think that it's a chain, right? So there's a connection between the last and the first. So you would, if it goes sight and feeling, seeing and feeling, tasting and smelling, and I don't know, like hearing and touching, physically touching, not just the first one, sight and emotional feeling, then smell and taste, and then hearing and physical touch. Then if it repeats, then the next step is sight and emotional feeling right after hearing and physical touch. So I know I'm way off on a rant, but if you look at this, just to like highlight and make sure that I show that I'm not just a crazy person ranting. If you look at this, the binary triality pattern, you're like, here's your senses. Like I said, there's tons of examples of this everywhere. You can see this with the colors too. We'll look at that in a minute, but let's just look at colors, because colors really make it very easy to see. So say this is 1, this is 2, yeah, it's this, and this is 3. This is showing that like the levels of, I guess, the succession of each of them. So, which is, you could do this with quarks and in the standard model. So if you go to the standard model and you're like, where is it? Let's do electrons and muons, and electrons and neutrinos. So you're like, okay, the leptons, these are the lightest, then you increase the mass, the energy, then you increase it again. But you can also think about this as these two are reflecting across these two. I guess these two are reflecting, and these two are reflecting across these two. So you can see this with colors. So you could say green and purple are reflecting across orange. Or you could say purple is heavier color than orange, which is a heavier color than green. And this can be observed when you start looking at like color mixing and stuff like that, where you've got additive color mixing, red, blue, and green, but then you've got subtractive color mixing, which is like your TV is additive. So it's like red, blue, and green. You look at the tiny pixels, there's 3 colors, different color pixels. There's red, blue, and green. Then you look at like a printer, and it's got printer ink that's color printer, has magenta and cyan and yellow. And it's like between these, you get every color, and there's also like a periodicity to these. Kind of. It's tough. I'm not doing a good job explaining it. And honestly, I kind of lost exactly like my point. But my point is that you cannot explain matter without mind. You cannot explain mind without matter. And that there's a periodic hierarchy that is contextualizing of them that causes us to break down various aspects of sentience into kind of like mind and matter. So you could say sentience is the ability to perceive or see, and the ability to feel. Okay, emotions and sight. Sentience. 2 sides of sentience. But then there's also like these, in order to differentiate that information and to know that and organize it into a hierarchy, we need these other senses as well. So, and I've said this before, your sense of taste trumps your sense of smell. So you'll eat something that smells bad, but you will not like choose to smell something that smells bad but tastes good. Okay, so like if you wanted to have a perfume on you, you wouldn't choose durian fruit. as this is my perfume, a durian smell. No. But you would eat durian, even though it smells horrible. And it's because the goals are defining a context, and then the periodicity dictates like your constraints and degrees of freedom within that goal. So if your goal is to eat, then it will trump, your taste will trump your sense of smell. But if your goal is just to smell, then you won't you'll like, you'll place certain senses before others, and that organizes into a periodicity. You'll eat something that looks horrible and smells horrible and tastes great, but you won't eat something that smells great and looks great, like soap. Some soap looks great, smells delicious. You take a bite, it tastes horrible. Durian looks gross, smells gross, tastes great. You eat it. So like there's something going on with organizing information into various differentiations and hierarchies. That same structure where the information itself is sentient, okay? When it's organized, when the bits of information in that same system of organization and hierarchies are sentient, that's where you get like matter. Because the sentient being above us, the thoughts and of that being, or what is in the mind of that being as a thought to that being, is going to be encountered by us as like physical reality. It's not just the thoughts. It's complicated because it's like the entanglement connections between sentiences of that being is what causes the observation of material reality. But I'm not going to get into that because I'm going to continue ranting and I don't have time. I hope some of that made some sense. I know I kind of lost my thought sequence a bit, but it's tough stuff to talk about. But yeah, when Noam Chomsky says it's matter that needs explaining, not consciousness, it's both simultaneously must be explained or else none of it will be explained. That's the point. That's most important to take away from everything that seemed unrelated prior to this.
So it's chemical aspects, it's mental aspects, it's other aspects of the world. Try to see if physicists will be able to discover what constitutes the world. But going back to Russell, I think he was right to say that it's not consciousness that needs explaining, it's matter that needs explaining. Consciousness we know all about, more than we know about anything else. Matter we have problems with.
Am I to understand that as saying it's not consciousness we need to explain, but unconsciousness? Or are you making a distinction between matter and unconsciousness?
Unconsciousness too, but also matter. It's what is, if you want to, what's called reducing consciousness to the material world. Can't do that until you know what the material world is. You can describe consciousness in extensive detail. As I say, the best descriptions are in literature, where consciousness is what it's about.
Okay. So here's what I was trying to show. So sentient singularity states that the totality of existence is a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. Sentience is the phenomenon of feeling, sensations, and emotions. Singularity is defined as something that is one distinct unit or as something that is especially unique. Sentient singularity theory denotes that a singularity as a structure that has the property of infinite oneness, such as a Mobius strip, or one being that is composed of many beings, such as a multicellular organism. Sentient singularity theory can therefore imply that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional singularities of sentience or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures with a single self-reflective, not a perception heading, an assembly body of integrating multiple entangled strings of information. So we skip down here. Sentient singularity theory characterizes the fundamental building blocks of the cosmos to be sentient beings, and that sentience is the universally defining and animating feature of everything in existence. That space, time, matter, force, and all other observable phenomena are emergent from the motivations, interactions, perceptions, and cognitive processes of sentient beings. Okay, if the primary structure of reality is sentience, then any master theory is not a theory of everything, but instead a theory of everyone, essentially. So basically, if we go to this, we're like, this is what I was trying to do. I kind of just lost it. Like, this is sentience. Like, this would be mind, matter. This would be consciousness, unconsciousness. Here. This would be beings and things. Bingo. That's what I'm trying to show. Gosh, that took like way too long, and I just ranted, and because I got lost in my own like attempt to explain it. But I realized what I was trying to do when I reheard what he was saying. So let's say you have sentience, a sentience or a sentient singularity. Or I guess you could say sentience. Just say that. Is or existence, which they're the same, can be divided into beings and things. And a being is mind, fundamentally. But it's not just a mind. It's really like, you could also do it like this. Mind, body. And then you could say like kind of like that, or even like this. There. Beings and things, mind and body, information and matter, consciousness and unconsciousness. And this, you can even, is one thing, but it is existence, which is sentience. There is no such thing as existence outside of sentience. And these are the perspectives, I guess you could say. Percept. Receivers. Okay. You can't understand what this is without understanding what this is. You can't understand what this is without understanding what this is. You can't understand what these are without understanding what these are, and you can't understand what these are without understanding what these are. You can't understand what mind is without understanding body, and you can't understand what body is without understanding mind. You cannot understand what information is without understanding matter, and you cannot understand matter without understanding information. These are simultaneously understood sides of coins. Heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. You cannot, when Noam Chomsky says we understand what consciousness is, we don't understand what matter is. I agree, we intuitively know what consciousness is. We don't actually know what consciousness is. Because we don't really know. I mean, we intuitively know what consciousness is, and we intuitively know what matter is. We don't intrinsically know what consciousness is, or intrinsically know what matter is. And you cannot know intrinsically what matter is, which is the goal of science right now, in the theory of everything, to intrinsically know what matter is, without intrinsically knowing what consciousness is as well. So when he says we do understand consciousness, we don't understand matter, we don't understand, and some people are like, we understand matter, we don't understand mind. Everybody's wrong, but everybody's also right. We intuitively know what mind and matter are, what consciousness and matter is. We don't intrinsically know what mind or consciousness are, or intrinsically know what matter is. So that's a different thing. One of them allows you to feel your way through the dark. The other one is like all of a sudden you've turned the lights on. It's like, can I get from one side of this room to the other with the lights off? By feeling my way through it, kind of like intuitively knowing what mind and matter are? Yes. But if you want to really be able to take advantage of everything that's in the room and maneuver perfectly in a predictable fashion without like bumping into things unexpectedly, you have to intrinsically know what the room looks like. And that means you have to like basically peel back the curtain or turn on the lights, essentially, kind of like metaphorically speaking. But we need to do that when it comes to consciousness and matter. We need to turn on the lights of understanding what they are. And you cannot do that with one of them and not the other. You have to simultaneously do it with both. That's what's so difficult about this. And I also state this in my paper, basically, where I say, here, the search for a toe has a specific and inconvenient characteristic, and that cannot be defined by or any of our current scientific narratives. And that's due to this, basically. It's that there are a number of hurdles that complicate the attempt to judge those theories these theories of everything, but there are two requirements that must be fulfilled before the scientific community can move forward. First, we need an accurate and collectively accepted definition of an ultimate theory or theory of everything. And second, we need a new linguistic framework for discussing concepts that transcend beyond the bounds of relativity. And those words, those definitions and terminology within that linguistic framework must capture the fundamental essence and nature of that which is trying to be described. And because of that, this is the problem. Since these two requirements seem to necessitate an objective perspective of existence, meaning an intrinsic, not intuitive, but intrinsic understanding of existence, both matter and mind, in order to deduce these solutions to their associated problems, these associated problems may only be solvable by those who have basically already, essentially, successfully found the theory of theories. So basically, the problem is that nobody can define intrinsically what matter is if they haven't also intrinsically defined what mind is, or what consciousness is. Nobody can intrinsically define what consciousness or mind is until they've intrinsically defined what matter is. This is a big problem. And it's a superposition problem of understanding objective structures, is that they're all superpositions. You cannot understand the one and the many problem by just understanding one and then understanding or just understanding the many. You have to understand both simultaneously. They're completely entangled. It's like my four primary perspectives. It says here. Sentient singularity observes four primary perspectives, which are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These four perspectives are interdependent and entangled, as the awareness of one of them entails the awareness of all four. Okay, because if you know what inside is, you know what is outside. Or if you know what it is inside, then you know what is outside. If you know what is inside and outside, then you know what is separate and what is not. What's outside the house is separate from the house. What is inside the house is part of the house. It's one with the house. They're all interconnected. This is the problem with the theory of everything. You either have to understand basically the essential nature of everything, or you can understand the essential nature of nothing. You can understand specific natures of all kinds of things without understanding the specific nature of everything. So, you can understand, I don't know, dogs and paint and traffic and, I don't know, cars without understanding everything else. But you can't understand mind without understanding matter, and you can't understand matter without understanding mind. You can't understand consciousness and unconsciousness separately. You have to know that this assembly is self-aware and therefore is conscious, and this assembly is defined by the perception of an external or separate observer, and therefore is unconscious. So like a cup or keys are unconscious, but my dog is conscious. At least she is now. She wasn't a few minutes ago. I mean, you're still conscious when you're sleeping. You're just not conscious of this. You're not playing Xbox Live. You're playing Campaign when you're sleeping. But you're still conscious. You have dreams and you're conscious of what's happening in your dreams. Okay. Final thing, just as a statement regarding what we just discussed that took way too long. Here's a clip of Chomsky talking a lot about it.
Bits and pieces of it reaching awareness, fragments usually, but so interpenetrated with what's conscious that you just can't study them separately. Study of consciousness is never going to get anywhere unless it integrates itself with a much richer study where we understand much more of the unconscious, inaccessible mental processes that are underway. They interpenetrate so closely you can't separate one from another. So I don't think consciousness studies are going to get very far unless they begin to integrate them into the rich, complex, inaccessible mental processes that are inaccessible to consciousness, is my opinion. Two problems with consciousness studies. One is the one I mentioned before, Russell's problem. The problem is matter, not consciousness. The second is this one. What's conscious can't be sensibly disentangled from what's unconscious and inaccessible. Disentangled is one of Hilary Putnam's favorite words, incidentally. A lot of his philosophical work is arguing that you can't disentangle things. This is one example, I think. Not
Brilliant. Brilliant. Good. I'm going to end up deleting that rant in the middle of this, probably. I mean, we'll see. Where I just went on, and I could not figure out, like, how to describe exactly what he just described until the last, 15 minutes. But this is correct. You must understand what mind is simultaneously with your understanding of matter, like intrinsically of matter, as my voice cracks. You can't separate them because they are entangled. They're actually two sides of one structure. They're the heads and tails of one coin, which is existence, and the essential nature of existence, other than it exists, is that it is sentient. You can divide it, like I said, into beings and things, mind and body, information and matter, and consciousness and unconsciousness. But you cannot understand the white ones here without understanding the dark ones here. They are two sides of one coin, the perceivers and the perceptions. Okay, that's it. Any final questions before I wrap up? After I think this was actually pretty close to 2 hours. I apologize for ever losing track of, or seemingly losing track of, the original idea, but these are super complicated topics to discuss because, as I said earlier, we don't have the linguistic framework for doing so yet. And they're super simple ideas, and describing them requires describing them in a super literal way. And all these structures are superposition structures. They're super structures. They are super. There are two things simultaneously that appear to be opposites, but are actually, in truth, mutually dependent. Mind and body, not separate things. Your body is your mind. Your body is the bridge between your mind and matter. And it's the superposition structure of mind and matter, which it means it's part of your mind. Like, you can't separate body from mind. I mean, it's all entangled. And that's why we're not good at discussing this, because our normal lines of being like, that's a car, and we know where the limit of that car is. It's like, is the road part of the car? No. Is the body part of the mind? Yeah. Is it separate from the mind? Yeah. That's not true of a car and a road. You know? So it's tough. Anyways, with that, thank you everyone for watching. I hope this made some sense, and apologize for my dog making noise. I will be in the Discord call on Thursday at 7 p.m. If you'd like to join, please private message me on Instagram, and I will send you the link. That's always a great call. And like I said, the week after that, I will be gone for the holidays. If I do not see you, have a very happy Easter, and have a good Passover. If you celebrate either of those. If you don't, have a great week.